I got a joke for you. It's an Easter joke. It's not. All right. It's not. It's not actually an Easter joke. It's a Good Friday joke. But if you tell the Good Friday joke on Good Friday, it doesn't go down very well. So, but you can tell it on Easter. So anyway, so this is. I learned this is like one of the few jokes that I know. And I learned it when I was here in Japan. So, anyways, here you go. What was Jesus' last miracle? That's it. Thank you, thank you. Oh, goodness. Anyways. When I was in my 20s, and I was sort of discovering myself as a poet and trying to be a bit of a bohemian and this alternative kind of guy, and so I took on fairly some sort of characteristic style choices that I thought reflected this artistic nature. So I had this kind of curly flock of seagulls locks down the middle of my forehead, and I would at fancy events I would wear this vintage bow tie, and sometimes I'd walk with a walking stick, and I always mismatched my socks because I thought that was just a sign that anything goes. I'm crazy. I got argyle on one foot, stripes on the other. Look out. I'm radical, very edgy, and I would never wear a watch. But I would just kind of stand around busy places hoping that somebody would ask me what time it was. And whenever anybody asked me what time it was, I would say, "It's now." But all of that changed when I met Peter Molnar and started working for Peter Molnar at Sydney Tower, duty free. I started selling watches, working for Peter Molnar. When I first, because I used to think, I guess I used to think watches were like these shackles, they were like these, you were a slave to time, but no, they're not that way anymore. But when I met, so Peter Molnar was my boss, and the first time I met him, I went for this job interview because I'd finished my stay in Japan for 6 years. I was here teaching and stuff, and tried to study Japanese fairly hard. And when I got back to Australia, I looked for jobs that where they wanted somebody who spoke Japanese, and I found this position was open in a duty-free shop, basically. And so I went there, and I saw Peter walking towards me, and I didn't know who he was. I thought it was a security guard because he was dressed rather, I don't know. He had like these dark blue pants on. He was a big man. He had dark blue pants and this white business shirt, but it was open at the collar. And he had sort of a workman kind of blue vest. And he had his keys dangling. And he walked very purposefully, kind of like this. And I just thought, oh, security's coming, for some reason. And he sticks out his hand to me and he goes, "You must be Philip. Hello, how are you?" And he had this kind of, I can't do a Hungarian accent, it's terrible, but he had this thick kind of Australian Hungarian accent. And it was like, "Yeah, I am. It's nice to meet you." And I realized this was my boss. And he goes, Come, walk with me." Oh, I hoped this was going to be my boss. He hadn't hired me yet. So, "Come, walk with me." It was just, okay. And so we start walking. And I'm going to move away from the microphone, I think, because it's probably easier. So, we start walking, and we come out of the shop, and I positioned myself so that I was on, Peter was on my left, okay? Now the reason I did that is because I have a dodgy right ear. My bones in my right ear became calcified at some stage, actually in my teens, and I didn't really notice it was happening, but I slowly was losing the hearing in my right ear, and I always just thought that the telephone worked better on the left. I thought it's a left-handed telephone. That doesn't, oh, that's strange. Ah, that works. Didn't even dawn on me. It's your ear, Phil. Anyways, so I always put people on my left. I always put people on my left. I'm not much of a gentleman because I don't care which side of the road the traffic is on and where the lady's supposed to be. She's going to be on my left, so I can hear. And so I'm walking with Peter, and I put him on my left. And we start walking down the place, down through the shops of the Sydney Tower, kind of a poshy sort of place. And Peter kind of gradually moves over here and comes onto this side of me, comes onto my right side. And we take a few steps, and I'm like, this isn't going to work because I can't hear what he's saying. I move over to the side of him, and then he goes over to the side of me. And he just kind of stops in the middle of the hall, and he looks at me and goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "My right ear doesn't work very well." And he goes, "Neither does mine. But I am the boss. So you stand, you stand over there. You stand on the good side." So I had to stand on his side so that he could hear me, right? And I also thought that was such a telling thing, because I thought, really, if he was like a boss, he should be saying, I want to be on the side so you can hear what I'm saying, because I'm the boss and what I'm saying is important. It was very subtle, but it was important. He was like, I want to be able to hear what you're saying to me. So that was sort of my first introduction to Peter. And as I said, he was wearing this sort of, it looked like a uniform of sorts, and he wore the same thing every day. All right. Now Peter was a millionaire, I guess. I mean, he had assets worth well over $1 million, and had an incredible turnover in this business that he owned. And yet every day he just always wore the same things. And I remember I asked him about that once, and he said, this is similar to a few famous people, I think, who usually have a lot of money or are very clever, like Steve Jobs, and that they're like, I don't want to worry about that stuff. I don't want to worry about what I'm going to wear. Right? And Richard Feynman, the physicist, he would go to the coffee shop, and he just said he got too tired of trying to decide and look at the menu, waste of time, and he just every time he went there he ordered the same thing. Maybe it's boring, I don't know. Maybe it's genius. But Peter always wore the same sort of set of clothes. I mean, I'm sure it was a different set of clothes, but they looked the same. But anyways, and he always had his keys dangling. And I asked about the keys, and he said that that was so people knew he was around. He liked people to know, because there's sort of there was a lot of valuable merchandise in this place we're working. And so there's sort of two schools of law enforcement deterrent. One is you hide behind the billboard and wait for the people and catch them, which isn't really a deterrent. But the other one is to make noise as you're going around and drive around with your lights on. Anyway, so he wanted people to know that he was around. So he had his keys, and they always jangled, and we kind of knew he was coming. I always thought it was like a bear bell, except the bear was wearing it, which I think is a good idea. Anyway, so he always had this. And when I was listening to Tom tell his story, and sort of categorize bosses as being, not generous and after money. Peter had a lot of money, but he was a very generous man, And it was interesting because he looked very much, I was struck actually when I first met him even, he looked very similar to my father. And sometimes I would catch him out of the corner of my eye, and I would think it was my dad, which was really strange because my dad was in America, obviously, and far, far away. And so I thought, oh, geez, looks a bit like my dad. But their personalities were very different, Peter was much more generous with his money, and my father was a bit tight, and my father tended to be a bit kind of insecure, I guess, sometimes. I don't know, a bit reserved. Whereas Peter was just, he had this big, open, gracious, generous heart, and it was amazing. And Peter was frank, and if he didn't like something, he would tell you. And he would make these like displays of watches and things, and he would come or you know, ostrich skin bags or whatever. And he would come and look at it, and if he didn't like it, he would just say, "This looks like dog's breakfast." Just, there was a dog's breakfast. Heard that far too much. But if he liked something, he would say, "Beautiful." I love the way he said that. Beautiful. I want you to say it with me, everybody. Beautiful. That's it. It's a good way to say it. Because something, it's not just beautiful, you know? It's beautiful. And there's this kind of song-like quality to it. I loved that. I really appreciated that about him. So he taught me how to kind of have this sort of open heart and to be more generous with my emotions and appreciating things. Working in the duty-free shop was sometimes, it was interesting when it was interesting, but a lot of the times there was just a lot of standing around, you know, so we spent a lot of time standing. You get very sore kind of standing all day, and especially if there weren't many customers. So we had this song, and I'd like to just sing this song for you because it kind of sets the mood for the duty-free shop. And it goes like this. It's in Japanese. Like you have to say that. 頭が痛い、腰が痛い、心も痛い、耳が痛い、眉毛も痛い、この仕事で体のすべてが痛い、ずっと立つの仕事はやだやだ、お客さんが来ない、お金もからない、それが一番痛い。That's the痛いsong. Anyway, so we'd sing this song from time to time, and you know, sometimes things would go well, and but as a shop, it was a wonderful place to work. It was we had a lot of fun, and again, it had a sort of family sort of vibe to it. For me, I don't know if it was probably more for me because Peter just looked so much like my father, you know, and it just had that wonderful feeling to it. But I was working there, and one day I got a call from my sister telling me that my father, who was in the States, and he had cancer, and I knew that, you know, he was undergoing treatment, and he'd had cancer for about 6 months. And I got this call from my sister saying, you know, something has happened with Dad's kidneys there, you know, and he's in the hospital, and if you want to see your dad, come now. You have to come now. And it was like, I didn't have enough money to get there. You know, I didn't know how I was going to get there. And the only thing I could think of was I went to this man that I worked for. You know, I worked for him only, I think, for about 8 months at the time. And it was just like, Peter, you know, I don't know how to ask this, but, you know, I want to go see my dad. Can I have $2,000? I don't know, how do you ask it? What do you do? What do you do? And it was not even a question. And his response was, is that enough? You know? And I was just like, oh man. You know, and so he gave me the money so I could buy a plane ticket, and I went and I spent time with my father and got to see him, and that was fantastic. And then after I came back to Australia, It was about, I don't know, maybe 10 months after that when my dad actually passed away, you know, and I missed him terribly, you know, obviously. It's just, you can't even express that. But, I don't know, something about the time after that, like, I would see Peter and I would see this kind of, I don't know, it's not a ghost of my father, but there was sort of this aspect of my father that was in him, you know, and every time that I would hear Peter say, beautiful, you know, it would just make my heart somehow think, yeah, it's beautiful, you know, and I loved my father, and time, even though eventually it runs out, is not the enemy, you know, and every minute, every moment, you have to make beautiful. Thank you. All right. I'm going to bring over my workbench. So this is my looper, and it allows me to kind of build pieces here. And that's what I'm going to do. And this one is called Heave Ho, and it's a bit of a work-inspired piece, so I thought it would fit with the boss's theme. And I've got my workbench, which also fits with working, so that's fantastic. Cool. All right, here we go. The keys for Peter. Boom. 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 Out of here. Boom. 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 Now sometimes, my friends, sometimes you have difficult days. You know those kind of days. Cause some days your bed is full of roses. Every day's a pedal surprise. But sometimes the morning's so goddamn heavy, you need a crowbar just to open your eyes. You need a crowbar, need a crowbar, need a crowbar just to open your eyes, yeah. And sometimes the wind is behind you. Old Mother Weather won't fail. Sometimes it's like you're out, stuck in the ocean, paddling with both arms and blowing the sail, yeah. Paddling with both arms and blowing the sail, yeah. You're paddling and blowing. That's when you heave, heave, ho. That's when you heave, that's when you hold. You gotta steam like a shovel just to move. Expect your trouble, gotta pull like a bag just to pass go. Heave, oh, you gotta heave, oh, you gotta steam like a shovel just to move, expect your trouble, gotta pull like a pack mule, oh, just to pass go. But some days the numbers all love you. The system just can't go wrong. But sometimes you're only an inch away, and that inch feels like it's 10 miles long. And sometimes your cup overfloweth, a fountain of cool, cool wine. Sometimes the cup is bone damn empty. All you got to drink is sand and brine. All you got to drink is sand and brine. All you got to drink is sand and brine. That's when you heave, oh, heave, oh. You gotta steam like a shovel just to move back the trouble. Gotta pull like a pack mule just to go. Steam like a shovel, move back the trouble. Sometimes you gotta bust your ass just to go. Yeah, heave, oh, pull like a pack mule just to go. Gotta pull like a pack mule just to go. Yeah, pull like a pack mule just to go. Yeah, pull like a pack mule just to go. Yeah. Now you know some days things just don't quite work so well. You know, it's like in the morning the day breaks, and then you spend the rest of the day trying to put it back together again. You know what I'm talking about. Some mornings it's like your bed is one of those electromagnets that they have in the junkyards. They pick up the wrecks, and you're just this tangle of paper clips, you know, and it's just not gonna happen. And some mornings it's like you need a cup of coffee just to have the energy to make a cup of coffee. And it just never gets made. That's when you heave, oh, gotta heave, oh, you gotta steam like a shovel just to move back your trouble. Gotta pull like a pack mule just to go. Gotta steam like a shovel, move back your trouble. Sometimes you gotta bust your ass just to go. Yeah, heave, oh, gotta 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 steam like a shovel just to move back the trouble. Gotta pull like a pack mule just to go. Gotta pull like a pack mule just to go. Gotta steam like a shovel just to go. Gotta heave, oh, gotta heave, oh, gotta steam like a shovel just to move a speck of trouble. Gotta pull like a pack mule just to pass go. Thank you. We'll see you next month.